Hi, this is a simplified introduction to textual criticism, which in the case of Bible has to do with whether or not text that you see in a copy is accurate with respect to the original. It's really not that hard to do, but it is very tedious, because if you see in the lower window here, the one that I'm moving, that's actually a copy of a photographical copy of the Rosetta Stone. And the part that you see is in Greek. And if you look very, very closely, it should show up in the video, you'll see that there are a bunch of block letters, okay, that are all crammed together. There's no punctuation, there's none of those little funky marks above the letters to tell you how to pronounce them. It's just a bunch of block letters all run together. You can't even tell where one word ends and one begins, let alone the sentence. That's what the copyists were copying from. Your oldest texts of the Bible, pre-Catholic Church, all have this running together quality to it. And so you need to know that this is what the original looked like. Alright? So when they're copying, it's easy to make mistakes. But, and this was God's foreknowledge, okay? This stuff here, all this text here, you don't need, see that, I'm just, showing you that this is the Greek text. You don't need punctuation in Greek. You really don't. You don't need to know what's a capital letter and what's not a capital letter. The way Greek is structured, it has its own syntax, and the sentence naturally begins and ends based on case endings and a lot of other things that are in the sentence. Alright? So it doesn't matter most of the time, 99% of the time maybe. It doesn't matter that there will be spelling mistakes, because the rest of the sentence will reveal what those mistakes are. And we're going to go through a live example of that in James 4:5, so you can see this yourself. So God foreknew when He chose Greek to be the language of the New Testament, He knew that people were going to make copying errors. So He picked a language that, even with copying errors, you can know what the words are. The same thing is true for the ancient Hebrew. The ancient Hebrew text we have that survives is called the Masoretic text, because during the Middle Ages, the Hebrew scholars realized they needed to, preserve the pronunciation of the letters, and they needed to, do certain things for the modern readers. So they put in little helpful marks so that you could easily, more easily read it. But it didn't alter the words. And Hebrew, like Greek, doesn't need punctuation. It doesn't need all those extra marks, okay, to be the same words that God initially gave out. And if there are copying errors, they stick out. And we're going to go through an example so you see it. Now, we're going to go back to the Greek text. When these guys, most of our manuscripts are from the 4th century and later, when they would, take this big block of text and they wanted to render it more readable, they basically, only usually in Latin or something else, but even when they were transliterating the Greek, they would make these little columns that show pretty much like this top window here. Alright, they'd use really fancy script, because they thought that was pretty. It makes it terribly hard to read, though. And like the original, see the original at the bottom? They would run all the letters together, and they'd go like, 4 inches or 2 inches. And then it wouldn't matter if, see, this is the word jumped, right there. That's the word jumped. They would break the word in the middle to keep to the margin, because they thought that was prettier. Alright? So that the word jumped here, pretend that was scripture, the word jumped here is split across 2 lines. Alright? So they were busy on making it look pretty. The fact was, though, that they also made it harder to read. And you can see copies, they're all over the place on the internet. You can just, get copies of the ancient manuscripts, little sample copies. And you can see how they did that. They used columns like a newspaper. And they would just run all the letters together. In some copies, they actually put spaces between the words. But a lot of them, they didn't even do that. And all they cared about was hitting the margins. Okay, they wanted pretty text, not readable text. Now, as time passed, and Jerome was one of them, this way of writing scripture was very annoying. Okay, and so there were changes made in the later manuscripts, and that's one way we can tell how old a manuscript is, even though it's the same words, because the style of copying it changed over the years. Also, the pronunciation of the words changed, and when the pronunciation would change, in order to keep it to be the same words, it was variantly spelled. And we're going to see an example of that in this video. Okay, but I want to show you the heart of what textual criticism is. Pretend that this was the original, all right? Only I'm using the fancy script like the scribes used, all right, the Byzantine scribes. Byzantine and medieval. Okay, pretend that was the original Bible. Now pretend somebody wanted to make it readable, and this was what they typed instead. All right, as you can see, it's accurate. The white furred cat jumped over the brown furred dog. You see that? Okay, so this particular scribe will say, copied it correctly and readable. Oops, you're not supposed to see that yet. Copied it correctly from the original. Okay? Now, let's say that somebody else, let's pretend this was the original, here's the first copy. Let's say the next guy looking at the copy didn't have this to check. Alright, so all he had was that as the original. This is the original as far as he's concerned. Alright, but when he's writing, he's tired, because you're talking about thousands of verses they had to do. So when he does that, instead of saying cat, he says jat. Alright, but notice how the sentence still has the same meaning. You just know that, oh, poor guy, the J really belongs over here, because the jat doesn't so the J belongs over here, because you can tell that this means cat anyway. This is white furred, and this is brown furred, this is the dog, and of course you have context to work with. Alright, so they know, okay, the J is just misplaced, so the J belongs over here. So the third guy seeing the copy, alright, could have and should have known not to reprint jat, to put the J over here by Alright, but let's say he was tired too. In fact, he was so tired that he forgot one of the R's in furred. Alright, and he replicates the error in the second copy. Alright, and since he made this error here the first time, he makes it the second time. Alright, but he not only makes that error, he reverses the D and G in dog. So this guy made a lot of mistakes. He must have been really tired. Okay, so now you have a sentence in this third copy that makes absolutely no sense. Okay, unless you had context, which of course you always have context. The white furred jat over the brown furred god. Well, that's clearly a mistake. Now, if you have thousands of copies, you're going to go look in one of the other copies to find out what the original was. Okay? But you see how it's easy here? It's real easy to know what the mistake is. And here you know for sure there's a mistake. Okay, so you know to go look for something. And you're pretty sure that there's no word F-U-R-E-D in the language, so you know there's probably another R that belongs there. So jat is probably an animal of some kind, and the same thing would be true of God. And of course you'd immediately know that it means dog, because God doesn't have any fur. You got that?